Mission accomplished. Well then, congratulations are in order, my dear. I never doubted you for a second, you know. Cooper was interrupted by a squeak that caused him to sigh. Aside from those first few minutes that cost me my hat anyway. Yeah, great. Wendy said with disinterested as she pulled the larger orb filled with Dipper's memories out of her pocket and placed it in her hand next to the smaller one. The two merged, and the once golf ball-sized orbs she started off with were now the size of a softball floating magically above the palm of her hand. She was so giddy at that moment she almost wanted to cry. Here were all of Dipper's memories, and hopefully she was mere moments away from bringing this nightmare she had unwittingly started to an end. Okay. All the orbs are together, so what do I do now to get Dipper's memories back? Simple, Red. Just break it. Break it? Yepers. You know, throw it on the ground, toss it against the wall, punt it like a soccer ball. I get the point, I know how to break stuff. I just want to know what good breakin' the orbit is going to do. Think about it, Red. The memory of your boy toy is stuffed inside that orb you're holding. So what better way to bust them all out than to smash that thing into a million tiny little pieces? You mean I could have broken any of these orbs at any time and gotten Dipper's back? Technically, but they would have returned in incremental bursts that would have left a ton of gaping holes in the memories of a lot of confused people. Trust me, gathering all the orbs first and then breaking them open all at once was the best route to go. I guess that makes. Wendy sighed before scowling at the floating scroll. This better work like you claim it's supposed to. Without further ado, Wendy wound up and slammed the orb against the ground. It shattered immediately, sending odd-looking black streaks of light flying off in every direction. Once the unusual light show ended, Wendy turned her attention back to Cooper and demanded. So is it done? Dipper's memories have been returned? Indeed they have. You've succeeded in your mission, Red. I am an interdimensional being of my word after all. And there's no catch, right? I'm not going to suddenly lose all my memories when I walk out of this cave, or something stupid like that. Cooper actually looked completely confused as to why she asked that. Of course not. I would have told you beforehand if you had to trade your memories for his. This was more of a game we were playing than a bargain anyhow. That's all I wanted to hear. Wendy exhaled deeply with pure relief. Now if you'll excuse me. The first thing I'm going to do is get somewhere where I can get a signal and call Dipper. Now why would you do that? Cooper asked slyly, causing Wendy to stop in her tracks and glare at the interdimensional snake oil salesman. She knew he was going to pull something shady. She just knew it. Why the hell shouldn't I? She asked dangerously. There wouldn't be much of a point. I mean, after all, he's not going to remember you. Or anything else about Gravity Falls for that matter. To him, this is just some backwater little town his sister used to visit during the summer. What? I knew it. I knew the solution was too simple for there not to be a catch, you lying little bastard. Whoa, now young lady. I never once lied to you. You played my game and you won. I fulfilled my end of the bargain exactly like I promised. How the hell do you figure that? If Dipper doesn't have his memory back, then you sure as hell lied about something. Oh, ho. I see what the problem is here. I'm afraid the fault is you own, sweetheart. Cooper started to float in circles around Wendy, glaring at her with a clinical eye. You see, I never promised your adorable little boyfriend would get his memories back. I said the memory of Dipper Pines would be unlocked. As in everyone else in his life that knew him would get their memories of old Dipstick back. My apologies if you misunderstood. I didn't misunderstand. Wendy growled through teary eyes and gritted teeth. You did this on purpose. You're a special kind of evil just like Bill. Why wouldn't Dipper's memories be in that orb too? Simple. Because I never removed his memories in the first place. Noticing Wendy's confused stare, Cooper decided to elaborate. With everybody else in your little town, I had to pull the memories straight out of their heads to make sure I didn't leave any loose ends. Dipper was a little more straightforward though. I didn't need to remove his, so I locked them away instead, and overrode his memories with some dull fake crap to fill in the gaps of the last few years of his life. What do you mean locked away? Exactly how it sounds. Locked away like a valuable treasure, or a handsome magical interdimensional being in a cave, or a really ugly kid you locked in your cellar. Here's the catch though. Like anything locked away, his memories can be unlocked and unleashed back upon the world. All you need is the key. And what exactly is this key? Wendy asked with a distinct mix of desperation and anger. Somehow, someway, Cooper yet again managed to appear to smirk without the benefit of a mouth. Take a wild guess. I assume you're hinting that it's me. But how am I supposed to give him his memories back? That's for you to figure out, Red. But you are indeed the key to helping him remember his past. Hey, if you two are as special as I have you pegged, this shouldn't be much of a problem for you. And how am I supposed to trust a word you say at this point? You've been misleading me every step of the way since the moment we first met. You even told me that I was supposed to be the only one who could see Dipper's memory fragments in those other dimensions, but that other Wendy from the last place I visited clearly saw me holding the last orb. Did she now? Interesting. This is quite the dilemma you have on your hands, isn't it, Red? You can't trust me. But you also don't really have a choice but to follow my advice now, do you? If you want any hope at achieving that happily ever after you saw while dimension hopping, you will anyway. You can choose to believe this or not, Wendy, but I've never once lied to you. Been cryptic, yes, deceptive maybe, but I've been a scroll of my word every step of the way. Well, you're right about that much at least. I have no choice but to follow your advice because I have nothing else to lose, except for Dipper if I don't at least try. I'm not looking for a happily ever after either, but I don't want some joker and his stupid games to deprive me of the chance to at least try for one. I hope this is the last time I ever have to see your smug face. Even if this works, but I find out that you still found another backdoor way to screw us over. I'm one of two people who knows how to find you. And I'll make sure you're buried so deep inside this cave that you'll never see the light of day again. With that, Wendy immediately left the cave, leaving Cooper and his bat friend behind. She is a feisty one. I knew she'd be fun to watch. He groaned softly as his flying rodent of a roommate began squeaking overhead. What? How am I supposed to know if it's cruel? I don't even grasp that concept. To me, this was just an experiment because human behavior has always fascinated me. And though I'm not one to brag, I do have to say that this experiment was a rousing success. I think she's proven by now that she was willing to go as far for him as he was for her. A shrill squeak was his only response. No, I couldn't have unlocked the kid's memories even if I didn't prefer to sit back and enjoy watching how Red handles things on her own. My powers are bound to this stupid cave, so unless somebody makes a deal with me, all I can do is observe them until the life of our agreement has reached its conclusion. So let's just enjoy the show and see if Red can jog the kid's memory. Once that happens, I'm afraid it's back to being banished to spacetime until the next poor schmuck summons me. And just for the record. Yeah, I am kind of rooting for them at this point. Cooper snapped his finger and created a little swirling viewing portal that kind of looked like a porthole. Was it a little intrusive? Maybe, but how else was he supposed to keep tabs on his clients? When Wendy made it back to her car, she looked positively worn out and defeated. It was 3 a.m., far too late to call anyone she knew and test if their memories of Dipper had returned to them yet. She'd just have to wait, which from her perspective, was the worst thing in the world she could be doing right then. She climbed into her car, and rather than starting her up and heading for home, she just sat there with her hands on the wheel, staring off into nothing. Eventually, she broke down, and began to violently slam her fists against the steering wheel. I was so close. I was so damn close. I can't even be sure if anything Cooper says is true. He hasn't been straightforward about anything. This is all my fault. I wish I'd never heard of that stupid legend about this stupid cave, otherwise none this ever would've. But then Mom would still be. Ugh. Wendy rested her weary head against the top of the steering wheel. Exhaustion soon took over, and Wendy was fast asleep. It would be hours before Wendy was awakened by the shrill ringing of her phone. Groggily, she picked her head up off one of the most uncomfortable pillows in the world, and immediately recognized the ringtone as Mabel's. Excited, she grabbed her phone to answer it, only for Mabel to abandon the call before she got the chance to accept it. Wendy checked her phone history and noticed Mabel had called several times already that morning. This was a good sign. She also noticed it was 10 a.m. already, leaving the redhead amazed over how long she was able to remain unconscious in such an uncomfortable position. She quickly called Mabel back, who answered the phone almost instantly. "Morning, Mabes, what's up?" "Wendy. Something really frickin' weird is going on here. Dipper called me from Piedmont this morning, which was strange in itself considering he was still in town as soon as yesterday as far as I knew, and now he's acting like he has no memory of every visiting Gravity Falls. He didn't remember Seuss, Grunkle Ford, or Grunkle Stan. Nobody. It's like he has the most specific selective amnesia the world has ever seen. I know what's wrong with him, Mabel. He doesn't remember anything about Gravity Falls, because as far he's concerned, he's never been here. I'll explain later, but for right now, I need you to get everybody together so we can meet up at the Mystery Shack. Get Seuss and the Stans on board at least. I'll explain everything when I get there." Whatever Mabel yelled into the phone in response got lost in the wind as Wendy disconnected the call before firing up her car. She had roughly 45 minutes to figure out how to explain to everyone what felt like a lifetime's worth of absolutely chaos. A being the likes of Bill Cipher. Ford began to panic as he jumped out of his seat. "Where did you confront this creature?" We must make preparations to contain this. Cooper character immediately. We can't allow him to. Would you clam down already, Poindexter? Obviously we'll deal with this scroll character when the time comes, but right now what's going on with Dipper is the priority. So cool your giblets and let Wendy finish her story. Right. Dipper, of course. Ford knew Stanley was correct. The thought of another Bill Cipher-type character posing a threat to Earth was simply overwhelming. If it makes you feel any better, Ford, Cooper is already pretty well contained, Wendy explained. From what I understand, Bill bound him to the shrine in his little cave, so he can't interact with people unless it's part of one of his bargains. Besides, it's impossible to find that stupid cave unless there's a full moon, so we'd have to wait a month before we could do anything anyway. Never trust anyone remotely associated with Cipher. But you're both right. Our focus should be on helping Dipper retrieve his memories. While I take no joy in putting you on the spot, Wendy, how did this Cooper fellow manage to entice the two of you to deal with him in the manner that's led to Dipper's current predicament? Based on your past experiences with Bill's kind, you both should have known better. It was because of my mom. Cooper offered to bring her back, and there was just no way I could refuse that. Bring her back from where? Mabel asked, looking totally lost because she was. I wasn't aware she went anywhere. Yeah, I just saw her Tuesday at my last card game. Completely cleaned me out again. Stan said, a contemplative expression on his face. Not sure why I keep inviting her actually. That's because you guys don't know the truth. My mother. She died over a decade ago from an undocumented illness doctors couldn't even diagnose. I was just a kid when she died, so when Cooper told me he could bring her back, I was willing to pay whatever price necessary to make that happen. Cooper didn't just bring her back to life though. He basically rewrote time, so it was like she never got sick and died in the first place. That's why, to the rest of you, she's always been around. Dipper and I are the only ones who knew the truth until now. Dudes. That's heavy. Seuss gaped, unsure of what else he could say. Mabel had a solemn response of her own. If somebody offered to bring my mom or dad back to life, I don't think I could have turned that down either. That would explain some. Gaps I have in my memory when it comes to your mother, Ford confessed. You mentioned that Cooper would demand a steep price for one of his transactions. What price did he ask you to pay, Wendy? That. He could cure my mother of the disease that killed her, but somebody else would have to be inflicted by the disease. That somebody was me. Everyone gathered around the table gasped. Mabel managed to stammer out, "You mean you're eventually going to get sick and... Not anymore. I actually had already contracted the disease. That's why I disappeared for the last month and cut off contact with everybody. If anybody had seen how sick I'd actually gotten, everyone would have been thrown into a panic." What? You mean you were basically dying, and you didn't even bother to tell any of your friends? Mabel scolded as she flailed her arms. Do you have any idea how crazy you drove Dipper while he was trying to figure out why you'd been ghosting him for weeks? I understand how stupid what I did was now, but I didn't think I had a choice at the time. None of you knew what I knew. Except for Dipper, and there was no way I wanted him to find out why I got sick and what I was sick with. Because I knew he'd go and do exactly what he did if he figured it out. Wait. Ford interjected as the pieces began coming together for him. Last night was the full moon. Which means Dipper. Wendy nodded her head in affirmation. He made a deal with Cooper to cure me of the disease. The price he had to pay, though, was any memory he ever had of Gravity Falls. At first Cooper wiped everybody's memory to make it seem like Dipper had never even visited Gravity Falls at all, but the jerk had me play some stupid game that got everybody else's memories of him back. Except for Dipper's, of course. His memories are still locked inside his head, and apparently I'm supposed to be the key to unlocking them. Yes. Mabel squealed as she jumped out of her chair. It makes perfect sense. In situations like this, true love is always the key. This is no time to be actin' ridiculous, Mabel. Wendy scolded, glowing as bright as a tomato. But yeah. Something along those lines. All I know is that I'm the one with the best chance of unlocking Dipper's memories. I think I'll have the best chance at succeeding if we can get him Gravity Falls. Once he sees all the familiar sights, how can he not feel like he's been here before? The only question is, how do we get him up here? Stan shrugged. We just need to convince old Dip to pay a visit here. How hard could that be? Harder than you might think, Mabel sighed. Both times I talked to Dipper this morning, he acted like he despised the very idea of ever stepping foot in this town. It was really weird. How can you hate a place so much when, for all you know, you've never even been there? No doubt a failsafe so whatever dark mystical powers the kin of Cypher is utilizing can't be easily undone, Ford surmised as he crossed his arms. How best to keep Dipper's memories blocked? Keep him away from the one location that might unlock those memories by making the very idea of Gravity Falls absolutely abhorrent to him. Dudes. It might be my imagination playing tricks on me again, but I think I might have an idea. Seuss announced, drawing everyone's attention to him. The fact that they actually seemed to be willing to hear his suggestion gave the big man a bit of stage fright. Well. Hambone, you and Dipper are used to celebrating all your birthdays together, right? Well, yeah, we are twins, Seuss. It used to annoy me as a kid, having to share my birthday with him, but to be honest now it feels like a tradition and our birthdays just wouldn't be the same if we didn't celebrate together. Well, there's your and then, dude. You guys have a birthday coming up in a couple of weeks. Maybe Dipper will be willing to visit Gravity Falls if he thinks it's the only way he'll get to spend his birthday with his sister. Seuss' idea was met with hushed silence by the rest of the group. Yeah, you guys are right. It was a dumb idea. Seuss, you're a genius. Mabel squealed as she reached across the table to hug to much larger man. As much as Dipper might hate the thought of Gravity Falls now, he still loves me. Do you really think that will work? Wendy asked unsurely. I'll make sure it does. I'll use every dirty trick in the book. The puppy eyes. The sad, neglected sister. I'll guilt trip, whatever it takes to get his ass to Gravity Falls. If this works, it should give you ample time to prepare Wendy. The twins' birthday is still 10 days away. For the first time since Wendy had escaped Cooper's shrine, she managed to smile. She finally had some hope. She had a chance to. No, she would get Dipper's memories back. All she needed to do now was show some patience and plan. There was no way she was going to allow Dipper to forget Gravity Falls. There was no way she was going to let him forget her. Dipper Pines disembarked the bus with a mix of dread and disgust. He'd never been to Gravity Falls in his life, and he never quite could understand his sister's unhealthy infatuation with the town. How was wasting your summer essentially working as slave labor in a tourist trap for their shady great-uncle a fun and magical experience? Yet still, Mabel had tried and failed every summer to get Dipper to take that trip up to Oregon with her, and Dipper had always refused. He had no interest in visiting the podunk little town, and for some reason, the thought of even stepping foot in that town felt as appealing and walking barefoot across rusty razor blades and used needles. So what finally convinced him to swallow his pride and finally pay a visit to this little armpit of a town? Well, his sister, that's who. Usually, she returned to Piedmont in time to celebrate their birthday together, a tradition Dipper had come to appreciate over the years. If he wanted that tradition to continue though, he'd have to come visit Mabel at her new home in Gravity Falls. Why she moved to this dump the moment she got the chance he'd never understand. To make matters worse, he found out only an hour or so before arriving that it wasn't Mabel who'd be greeting him, as apparently she got called into work when she was supposed to have the day off for her birthday. Now, he was scheduled to be greeted by a friend of Mabel's who was supposed to show Dipper around town until Mabel finally got released from the salt mines. How fun. He could imagine the sights he might behold in this nothing burger of a town. The text Mabel had sent him to relay that message wasn't helping calm his nerves. Sorry again, bro. My friend Wendy will meet you at the bus stop and show you around town. Oh, and by the way, she's single. You're welcome. Dipper blushed as he looked at the text again. Like he needed the added pressure of Sister Nun to subtly trying to fix him up with someone. He couldn't even recall her ever mentioning a friend named Wendy. Must be someone she recently met. A description would have helped, because he had no idea whatsoever what this Wendy girl even looked like. Hey there, dude. You're Dipper, Mabel's brother, right? At the sound of his name, Dipper turned around. And for a brief moment forgot his own name. Standing behind him was the smirking form of one of the most gorgeous women Dipper had ever laid eyes on in his life. A tall redhead with bright green eyes and a confident smirk that made her already pretty face that much more alluring. She couldn't have been dressed more casually. Blue flannel top, boots, and a trapper's hat, yet she somehow looked completely stunning in the ensemble, almost like she wouldn't look right wearing anything else. Yeah, I'm Flipper. I mean Dipper. I'm Dipper, nice to, meet you. Nice to meet you too, Dipper, Wendy giggled, though on the inside she was cheering at the top of her lungs. That look on his face was even more than she was hoping for. Like he fell in love at first sight all over again. I'm Wendy. Your escort and tour guide for the day. Sometimes Dipper loved his sister. He should probably remember to thank her later. Wendy led Dipper to her car, and as she was buckling herself into the driver's seat, she couldn't help but notice Dipper staring at her, while failing horribly at trying to act like he wasn't. This was another victory in her mind, but she still needed to play her part. See something you like? Dipper blushed like mad upon realizing he'd been caught and immediately snapped his head around to stare out the passenger side window. Sorry. I wasn't trying to be weird or anything. It's just. I'm pretty sure we've never met, but you kind of look familiar. Now it was Wendy's turn to feel her heart turn cartwheels in her chest. Could this be working already? I'm sure Mabel's showed you pictures of her trips to the falls. You probably recognize me from one of those. Yeah. That's probably it. He'd like to think he'd remember a face like hers if he actually had met her before. Now, while Wendy and the Mystery Shack crew were laying out their plans to help restore Dipper's memory, there was a hot debate over where they should take him first. Pretty much everyone voted for the Mystery Shack, the place that held the most significance for Dipper and his time in the town, everyone except for Ford that was. He was worried that bringing Dipper to the shack immediately might be too much too soon, and the feedback overload could possibly undermine what they were hoping to accomplish. Wendy was convinced enough to agree, and decided that taking Dipper to a few less significant, but still important locations tied to his past in Gravity Falls was the way to go. Their first destination happened to be one of the furthest out of the way. This is Lake Gravity Falls. Creative name, huh? It's beautiful. Dipper complimented, admiring the cliffs on the other side of the lake. There was also a waterfall in the distance that seemed oddly familiar to him. It's also home of the Gobblewonker. Wendy smirked at the confused look on Dipper's face. Think lame-ass knockoff version of the Loch Ness Monster. The locals love her though. Gobblewonker. Why does that sound familiar? The glint of recollection in his eyes quickly faded to Wendy's great disappointment. It was probably a good idea to keep him moving. Follow me. There's something I want to show you. It's a little bit of a walk, but it's worth it. The trip would take a few minutes, so Wendy took a stab at making some small talk to kill the time. So, how come you never came up to Gravity Falls with your sister? She used to talk about you all the time, and kept trying to assure everyone she'd convince you to come with her the next year. We were startin' to think you were imaginary. No, I'm very much real. I just never saw the point in coming up here. I'm not exactly the outdoorsy type, you know. Wendy snorted but managed not to laugh. You sure about that? You come across to me like the type who'd be up for the odd adventure. Didn't your sister mention you were into like, monsters and ghosts and stuff? Dipper blushed faintly and adjusted his hat. Ironically, a very familiar pine tree hat he shouldn't even own if he'd never actually visited the falls before. It had been so long since Wendy had seen him wear it, it was a bit of a nostalgic surprise at first. But then again, she was sporting a version of her old trapper hat in hopes Dipper might find it familiar. Maybe there was more of her Dipper inside there than they originally believed. I do have a mild passing interest, yes. I don't like to talk about it much though, since there's definitely a stigmatism involved with being interested in the paranormal. Hasn't exactly made me any friends or popular with the ladies. Well, you're in the right place for it now, dude. You're basically in the paranormal capital of the Pacific Northwest. There aren't not too many people in this town who don't have a story about seeing some kind of weird monster or a vengeful ghost. Seriously? Dipper asked with genuine curiosity and excitement. I wonder why Mabel never mentioned that. Maybe she did, and you just didn't listen. Wendy suggested as she came to a stop. We're here. You see that cave over there? That's where we're headed. Yeah, there was one tiny problem with that plan. Dipper scouted out immediately. So, are we supposed to swim out there or something? That's a lot of water between us and the cave. There's a high sandbar between the beach and the cave we can just walk across, so the water isn't as deep as it looks. It still goes up to about your ankles, so you might want to take your socks and shoes off. Dipper did as instructed and placed his footwear in the backpack he'd been lugging around with him. He only planned on staying in Gravity Falls for the day, so he packed very light. He followed his guide towards the cave, finding himself a little put off by the feel of wet sand on his feet, but it wasn't too bad. The water level inside the cave was actually a little bit higher, so Dipper wound up getting a portion of pants wet. So, why did you just lead me into a dark, creepy CA? It was a stupid question since the answer was impossible to miss. Just inside the mouth of the cave was the remains of what looked a lot like a giant prehistoric sea monster. Of the robotic variety. It was clearly robotic in nature, but that didn't make the sight any less impressive. Oh wow. Dipper pines, meet the Gobblewonker. Or at least a robotic version of what it's supposed to look like, built by Old Man McGucket. It used to be behind the waterfall out there, but a couple of years ago the mayor decided to drag it out here hoping to turn it into a tourist attraction. Unfortunately, tourists don't usually stop in Gravity Falls to visit the lake. It's more of a local hangout, so the town abandoned the project and left this poor girl here to rot. Wow. I mean. Dipper flinched as images began to flash in his head. They were of himself and his sister on a small fishing boat with an elderly man he didn't recognize. They seemed to be fleeing from something underneath the water when they passed through a waterfall and they found this. Dipper grunted and grabbed at his head, nearly falling over in the process. Oh man. Are you okay, Dip? Wendy asked as she rushed over to help steady him. Dipper looked at the girl funny. Dip? Oh, sorry. You just worried me for a second there. Wendy blushed, realizing she'd slipped up. Using her informal nickname for Dipper probably wasn't the best idea considering their current situation. Are you okay though? It's just weird. I remember seeing this thing before when I was a kid, but that's impossible. I've never even been to this town, let alone this stupid lake before. I need to get out of here. I'm starting to freak out a little bit. No problem, dude, let's head back to my car. Wendy aided Dipper on the walk back to the beach, where he was very thankful to get some covering back on his feet. No words were exchanged on the walk back to Wendy's car. Something had happened with Dipper, she just wasn't sure what. He remembered something. The problem was, it seemed like whatever he remembered caused him some sort of pain or discomfort. Or maybe a lost memory suddenly unlocking itself disoriented him a bit. As they approached Wendy's car, the redhead noticed something rummaging through the nearby bushes behind the parking lot. Namely a pointy red hat. Wendy smirked, sensing another opportunity to show Dipper what Gravity Falls had to offer. Hey Dipper. Remember when I told you about all the strange creatures the people of this town tend to see? How would you like to see a living, breathing one? I would love to. Are you saying there's one hiding in that bush? Wendy beckoned Dipper to come towards her with her finger and then used it to point down towards the bush. Dipper didn't notice anything at first, only to nearly jump out of his shoes again when a little bearded man in a pointy hat jumped out. Hey, what's the big deal, interrupting my... Oh, hey Wendy. Hey Dipper, what's shaking? Hey there Jeff, good to see ya. It's a gnome. Like a garden gnome gained sentience and learned to talk. Hey now. Referring to us as garden gnomes is a very offensive stereotype, you know. Besides, those ugly backyard abominations don't look like us at all. Wait a second. It called me Dipper. How did it know my name? Jeff appeared utterly confused. What are you talking about? Why wouldn't I? Jeff paused as he noticed Wendy making a shushing motion with her finger against her mouth. Mabel's met these little guys before, so that's probably where they got your name from. How he recognized ya, I have no idea. Jeff sort of got the picture and tried to play along. Oh yeah, Mabel told us all about you, Dipper. Showed us photos and everything. Welcome to Gravity Falls. My sister's on a first-name basis with gnomes. You think she might have thought to mention that to me at least once over the years. Dipper paused as he appeared to experience another memory surging forward. Thanks Jeff, talk to you later man. Wendy stood up and noticed the spaced-out look on Dipper's face. She completely misinterpreted what that look was about. I feel you man, it's weird seeing the little guys for the first time, isn't it? Who's Norman? Wendy stiffened at the question and tried to keep her voice steady. Norman? Name doesn't quite ring a bell. Did he have something to do with Mabel? I keep seeing him with her, but she seems younger. Did she date a guy named Norman while she was here? And why am I suddenly seeing him explode into a bunch of gnomes? It's probably another thing you've heard Mabel mention and only half remember, she suggested quickly as she placed a hand on his back and guided him towards her car. As they climbed inside, she was conflicted on whether she should feel excited or concerned. Dipper had barely been in town an hour, and some of his memories seemed to be coming back to him already. Unfortunately, Unlocking those memories appeared to be causing him great discomfort if not outright pain. She'd never been more confident in her decision that taking him to the mystery shack first would have been a horrible idea. Well, that was our not-so-famous lake, and surprisingly less famous gnomes. How about I take you into town and show you the sights? What few there are to see anyway. That sounds nice and normal. I can use some of that right about now. The next stop on their tour was a little local diner called Greasy's, which Dipper was actually quite grateful for. He hadn't eaten anything in hours, and the quaint eatery seemed normal enough. Except for this strange manliness tester in the corner that was giving him weird vibes. From there, Wendy decided to ditch her car at the diner, and took Dipper on a walk through the heart of the town center of Gravity Falls. Which confused Dipper to some degree since there was nothing particularly remarkable in that area that would seem to warrant a tour. It appeared to him like the center of any other small town he'd ever been through. And right there's the arcade. We used to hang out here a lot, especially during the summer. Yeah, arcades are cool. He loved arcades actually, he just wasn't sure why one would be part of this guided tour. It's actually been years since I've been inside. Since high school, I think. It's hard to believe. She may have been trying to retrieve Dipper's lost memories, but that didn't mean she couldn't get struck by a wave of nostalgia of her own or two. You mind if we head inside for a minute? I'd kind of like to see how the place has changed over the years. Before Dipper could even offer a shrug of agreement, Wendy had already walked inside. Wow, it hasn't changed at all. Wendy noticed with a slight hint of disappointment. Not that she was surprised. It had only been a couple of years, and the arcade had pretty much looked the same way it did when she was in grade school, aside from the occasional exchanging out of arcade cabinets. Hey, it's that dancin' game Mabes always liked to play. Oh yeah. Dipper recognized the machine. It was one Mabel often played at the arcades back home in Piedmont. The cabinet that caught his attention, though, was the classic version of one of his favorite games, standing just to the left of the Polybius machine. Holy crap, they have fighters here. I used to love his game. Used to? What happened? Well, nothing really. It's just that the game is almost as old as I am, and they stopped making machines for it years ago. This is the first time I've seen a cabinet for the game in ages. Welp, this is the place you want to go if you're looking for defunct, old as dirt, video games. Wendy smirked faintly. Did you want to give her a go? I think I have a couple of quarters hiding on me somewhere. I appreciate the offer, but nah. It's been so long, I'm sure I'd suck rocks now. It was cool enough just to see the game again. Dipper smiled as he watched the demo fight which featured his favorite character Rumble McSkirmish. Then something really weird happened. Rumble seemed to notice him. The digital sprite stared at the young man for a moment, before his pixelated eyes widened. Rumble immediately jumped at the screen and repeatedly punched at, in an apparent futile attempt to escape the machine. Realizing his efforts were in vain, Rumble jumped back onto the fighting stage and shook his fist at the perplexed young man watching him, before gesturing with his hand for Dipper to come get some. A stunned, wide-eyed Dipper backed away from the machine and looked towards an equally surprised-looking Wendy. Did you see that? Yeah. Wendy gulped. She'd eventually heard the Rumble story over the years, but she never expected that a video game character could still hold a grudge so many years later. I guess it's a unique feature for newer versions of the game maybe? Like I didn't have enough problems growing up without my video games wanting to kick my ass too. Maybe we should get out of here before one of these light gun games gets any ideas. The next stop on the checklist was even stranger than the last. Dipper was beginning to wonder if he was getting punked. That's some clean water, but why did we have to visit the community pool? Wendy struggled for an answer. Hey, it's a small town, dude. Gotta work with what we got, right? Dipper was beginning to debate whether it would sound too rude or not if he asked what time Mabel was getting off of work again. As nice as it was to have a friendly, uncannily attractive girl escorting him around town, if an old arcade and a community pool were the best the town had to offer. Deciding he didn't want to risk offending his gracious tour guide, he gave the pool a cursory once-over just to be polite. There was a young attractive blonde girl serving as the lifeguard on duty, yelling instructions to the crowded mass of swimmers. On the other end of the pool, he watched a young man do a perfect head-first dive into the deep end. It was admittedly kind of cool. The way he entered the water made him look like a fish jumping out of it. That strange fuzzy feeling smacked Dipper upside the head again. His vision wigged out for a moment, and briefly, very briefly, thought he saw a person with long flowing black hair and a fishtail. Dipper diverted his eyes towards the lifeguard tower, but instead of seeing the blonde who was on duty earlier, he saw a redhead in a lifeguard uniform that looked suspiciously like a younger version of his tour guide. He shook the haze out of his head, and the redhead turned back into the blonde, and the apparent merperson was nowhere in sight. "I've gotta get out of here. I gotta get out of here." Dipper, wait up. Dipper escaped the grounds of the community pool before coming to a stop, allowing Wendy to catch up to him quickly. He was panting heavily, but somehow Wendy didn't think it was because of the short distance he'd just run. She could tell from the look on his face that another memory had surfaced. "I think I'm losing my mind. I'm seeing things I know aren't there. If not that, it feels like I'm having dreams or visions of events that never happened. I knew coming to this town was a bad idea. I haven't felt right since I got here." Calm down, calm down. What exactly did you see? This is going to sound completely nuts, but I thought I saw a freaking mermaid in the pool. Or merman in this case. And when I turned around, that lifeguard we saw when we first arrived turned into, well, somebody that looked an awful lot like you. Like me? Wendy smiled impishly. Was she hot? That's not the point. Dipper yelped while blushing furiously, which was all the confirmation Wendy needed that the answer was yes. The scary part is that these images don't feel like a hazy dream or memory. They felt like they were there, as I was looking right at them. Don't overthink it, Dipper. Gravity falls tends to have strange effects on people. Hey, you're into ghost stuff, right? How would you like to visit an abandoned, supposedly haunted convenience store? Dipper blinked before refocusing his attention on Wendy. She knew she had him at the word haunted. On the drive over to the still infamous Dusk to Dawn, Dipper couldn't help but notice the ridiculously posh mansion decorating the top of one of the many hills surrounding the town. It wasn't just the pomp and circumstance that drew his attention to it. It felt familiar to him. That's an impressive mansion. Somebody important must live there. Old Dude McGucket's pretty cool, but I'm not sure how important he is. The manor used to be owned by the Northwest family, the richest folks in town. Still are, just a lot less so nowadays. Northwest, you say? Dipper's brow creased, right before another fuzzy batch of visions overcame him. The attack wasn't quite so overwhelming this time, but still alarming nonetheless. He kept seeing a blonde girl in a fancy dress, a hidden room of dirty secrets, a lumberjack ghost, a mirror, and people turning into wood. Wendy noticed Dipper holding his head again, which she assumed by now meant one thing. You haven't another one of those fuzzy vision episodes? Maybe. Dipper replied guardedly. He was feeling less and less trustful of the girl the longer this tour dragged on. He didn't really expect her to understand, much less believe him when he mentioned his strange episodes, but something about the way she dismissed them was off. Like they were no big deal, or if what she was hearing sounded somehow normal to her. Like she'd almost been expecting something like he explained to happen. It made him wonder if this girl had anything to do with what he was experiencing, though he couldn't for the life of him make sense of any possible way she could be responsible for them. At least she was still a good source of information for him, if nothing else. Do you happen to know anybody named Pacifica? Pacifica? Wendy frowned. Of course he would remember her name out the blue the second he saw something that could remotely remind him of the blonde heiress. No, this wasn't the time for her to be feeling jealous. Dipper did have a vision of her first, and he did seem to recognize her on some subconscious level when they first met. This wasn't a competition anyway. Every last memory they could yank out of Dipper's head was a good thing. Yeah, she's part of the Northwest family I just told you about. She's actually good friends with Mabel, so that's probably where you've heard the name before. Yeah. That makes sense. Dipper appeared satisfied from Wendy's perspective for now, but inwardly all he could think about was why he kept seeing a younger version of himself in a suit alongside the blonde girl. This is the place? Dipper asked as they exited the car, parked in front of a boarded-up convenience store. Yup. The store closed down shortly after the two geezers who owned the place kicked the bucket. Word got around that the place was haunted, so nobody bothered to try and reopen after that. Her hands in her pockets, Wendy slouched in Dipper's general direction, smiling mischievously. Rumor has it, the former owners were murdered and it's their spurts hauntin' the place, seekin' revenge on the rude teenagers who killed them. Seriously? Nah. Turns they both had heard attacks and dropped dead at the same time. The hauntin' part is true though. Apparently the old couple really hated teenagers. Wendy gave Dipper a playful nudge with her elbow before heading towards the entrance. Good thing you just turned 20 today, isn't it? Fortunate coincidence. But how are we going to? Before Dipper could finish his question, Wendy stuck her arm through a good-sized hole in the glass, easily unlocking the doors and pushing one open. Get inside. It's a lot easier to bust into this place now than it was when I was a kid. Used to have to climb up on the roof. The roof? Why did that sound familiar? Dipper briefly looked up at the roof, but once he noticed Wendy enter the store, he quickly followed after her. Well, the electricity finally went out, huh? I always kind of wondered who kept paying the power bill. Whoa, creepy. Makes me wish I brought my ghost hunting kit. Wouldn't be here long enough to make much use of it. Well, let's have a look around. Not that there's much to look at, mind you. No, this is great. There's something fascinating about places that get frozen in time. When you know basically nothing's been disturbed since the previous occupants left. It's a rare experience that gives you this unique feeling that's hard to explain, knowing you're one of the first people to walk inside that place for who knows how long. Dipper couldn't see Wendy's widening smile. This was the first time since Dipper arrived back in Gravity Falls that he sounded like the Dipper she knew and loved. As Dipper was taking in the sights, he had to do a double take when he noticed what looked like the face of a teenaged boy plastered across a cereal box, but on closer inspection, it turned out just to be a normal box of Frosted Flakes. Oh great, he was seeing things again. Come around this way, Dipper. There's something creepy I want to show you. Is this Smile Dip? Dipper called out suddenly. They discontinued this stuff years ago. Mabel used to love. A frown took over Dipper's previously cheerful expression. But how could Mabel have even known she liked it if she never? Well, she did try some when she broke in here with me and my crew a few years ago. Maybe that's where you got it from? Yeah, you're probably right, Dipper said in a hushed tone, as if trying to convince himself. I really need to listen better when she talks to me about this town. Wendy placed her hand on Dipper's back and guided him towards the counter. Now check this out. Still here after all these years. Dipper's eyes widened when they landed on what Wendy wanted to show off. The slightly faded outlines of two bodies, presumably the late owners of the now abandoned store. A morbid but still curious sight to behold. Whoa. You weren't kidding about. Dipper's eye twitched. And then they hit him. A barrage of images from a past trip to the dusk to dawn that surely never happened. The images were intense. Almost too much to handle this time. Dipper grabbed at his head and let out a scream before racing out of the store as fast as his legs could carry him. Dipper. God, not again. Wendy caught up to Dipper, doubled over and panting in the parking lot. He stood upright, grabbing at his head and began pacing frantically. Dipper. What's wrong? You saw something else, didn't you? What was it? Why should I tell you? Dipper replied hostilely, taking a step back away from Wendy. His reaction completely floored her. Why are you acting like this isn't weird at all? You almost seem excited over what's been happening to me. No. It's not that at all. I'm just trying to be supportive. Now please calm down, and tell me what you think you saw. Horrible things. There was this old ghost couple. People's bodies dematerializing and getting stuffed into video cameras and video games. I'm really not sure about this one, but I could have sworn somebody got turned into a hot dog. Then I saw the most horrible, terrifying sight I've ever seen in my entire life. Dipper paused for dramatic effect. I was dressed in a freaking lamb costume. Dipper's rant got interrupted by a loud snort. Dipper whirled his head around in the direction of said snort only to find Wendy with both hands covering her mouth, and her face bright red from struggling not to. Are you laughing? I'm standing here feeling like I'm losing my mind, and you think it's funny? No, man. Wendy laughed as she waved her hands in defense. It was just the thought of you in a lamb suit. I was only 12 or 13 in the vision, if that makes it any less humorous. Dude, that just makes it adorable. Don't tell me you sang the Lammy song too. How did you know about that? He was getting hostile again. Nobody should know about that. It's. Chill out, man, Mabel told me. Do you keep forgetting that I've known your sister for years? Damn it, Mabel. She swore she'd never tell anyone. If that's the way it's going to be, I might as well get on the bus and go back home. Look. So sightseeing around town isn't going as smoothly as I had planned. Why don't we just cut out all the crap, and I'll take you over to the mystery shack. You can meet Mabel there when she finally escapes from work. Fine. Something weird is going on around here though. And I promise you, I'm going to figure out what it is. You better keep that promise, Dip, Wendy thought as they headed for her car. Please. The ride to the mystery shack was painfully quiet, and it was making Wendy extremely nervous. Their plans seemed to be working, but not quite in the manner Wendy was expecting or hoping it would. Dipper was regaining some of his memories, but the problem was, he wasn't seeing them as memories. He viewed them as delusions or hallucinations, and the effect they were having on him mentally clearly had him on edge. He was angry, you can look at him and tell, and worst of all, Wendy herself felt like she had squandered any possible trust or goodwill he might have initially felt towards her. She'd forgotten how smart her guy could be, and she hadn't exactly done the best job of playing the ignorant friend of her guest sister, and Dipper was seeing through it. Taking Dip to the mystery shack ahead of schedule was risky, and she knew it, but she just wasn't sure what else to do. He was already threatening to hop back on the bus and leave, so she was probably one more bad trip down memory lane from losing her chance to unlock Dipper's memories. It was time to bring out the big guns, and that gun was the mystery shack. Unbeknownst to Wendy, Dipper was reliving another memory at that current moment. It also involved the dusk to dawn, only the aftermath of all the chaos. And the image of a teenaged girl in a trapper's cap making up some nonsense about beating up ghosts with a baseball bat to protect his image after witnessing him perform that ridiculous Lammy dance. The same girl in the lifeguard uniform. A girl with an uncanny resemblance to his escort, only a few years younger. Dipper's eyes softened as they briefly traveled to the redhead driving him all over town. I know you, don't I? I can feel it. We've met somewhere before, but that's impossible. I've never even been to Gravity Falls. Something's very wrong here, and my head's too much of a jumbled mess to even think straight. It wasn't long after before Wendy was pulling up Gopher Drive. Welp, here we are, dude. This is the mystery shack. Dipper trailed off as he stepped out of the car, completely unimpressed by the rugged old structure. It somehow managed to look vaguely familiar, yet completely foreign at the same time. Mabel always painted these grandiose images of how great the mystery shack was. I look at a place like this and all I can think is that I'm either going to be robbed or murdered if I walk inside. Don't think you have to worry about being murdered, man, but robbed. Nah, not since your grunkle Stan retired. Grunkle? Oh yeah, what Mabel calls our great uncles. Yup. If you think the old shack looks rough now, you should have seen it before Seuss fixed her up a bit. At least all the letters are on the roof now. This is fixed up. I've never been more confident in my decision to spend my summers at home. It has its charms. I used to hate workin' here when I was a teenager, but now I kind of miss the old place sometimes. That wasn't a lie at all. It's where Wendy had met the twins after all, though she'd be lying if she claimed she didn't prefer being a guest rather than an employee. Let me introduce you to the new Mr. Mystery Seuss. He and Mabes go way back. Seuss, huh? Doesn't really ring a bell, he lied. The name was vaguely familiar, but he'd been so shaken up by all the false memories this town had been filling his mind with, that he didn't want to give credence to any of them. Dude, does your sister ever talk to you about Gravity Falls at all? I have a hard time imagine Mabel wouldn't ever mention Seuss to you. Or Pacifica for that matter, especially knowin' how she likes to talk your ear off. She probably has, and I just tuned her out. Every time she starts rambling on about this place I'd always get this nauseous feeling in the pit of my stomach, and I'd just stop listening. Wendy frowned inwardly. Dipper's explanation was lining up with Ford's theory that Cooper's powers had instilled a blind hatred in Dipper towards anything Gravity Falls related. It was quite the clever failsafe to make sure Dipper never got curious and took it upon himself to investigate the falls and potentially retrigger his repressed memories. That kind of makes it weird for us since everybody here feels like we practically already know you. Anyway, follow me through here. Through the gift shop? Dipper asked as he stopped just shy of the threshold of the shack and peered inside. Is it okay for us to just let ourselves inside? And wouldn't we get in the way of his business? The shack is closed today due to a certain pair of twins' birthdays. Wendy winked. Plus, I'm always welcome here, man, so as long as you're with me it's cool. Any relative of Mabel's would be welcomed by Seuss with open arms anyway. If you say so. Dipper knew one thing. He did not want to enter that building. There was something off-putting and oppressive about it. This was where the birthday party was being held though, and where he'd eventually meet his sister, so he didn't have a lot of choice. He finally followed Wendy inside, and immediately found himself enthralled by the contents of the gift shop. The merchandise ranged from obviously cheap and fake to downright creepy and weird. And somehow familiar, but he couldn't for the life of him. I'll go get the big guy now. You wait here, Kay? Hey Seuss. You have a visitor. Dipper wasn't listening though. He was mesmerized by the mysteriously familiar trinkets that lined the shelves. His eyes eventually landed on the counter with the cash register, and for a brief second, he thought he could see a now familiar teenaged redhead and a younger version of himself standing behind it and laughing. He rubbed his eyes, but once his vision unblurred, the image was gone. Chalk another up to this town playing tricks with his head and his eyes. You must be Dipper. It's cool to meet you. Greeted a burly man who caught Dipper completely off guard. Any brother of Mabel's has gotta be an alright dude in my book. Thanks, Seuss was it? It's good to meet you too. That's me dude. Also known as Mr. Mystery. The mysterious proprietor guy of the Mystery Shack. Speaking of which, we've got some time to kill before the party, so how about a guided tour of the shack's mysteries and wonders? Free of charge of course for sharing a birthday with Mabel. Okay. Sounds harmless enough. Dipper began to follow the big man out of the gift shop when a t-shirt rack caught his eye, or rather a certain shirt on that rack. With a caption that was completely ridiculous, and frustrating because it somehow felt familiar to him at the same time. Pterodactyl Brothers? Seuss' face lit up with excitement when he noticed what had grabbed Dipper's attention. He swiftly raced over to the rack and modeled the shirt over his chest. I see you've noticed this fine piece of casual wear. Maybe because it brings back, I dunno, some old, repressed memories of checking out flying reptiles with a really cool friend maybe? No. Why would it do that? Pterodactyls have been extinct for millions of years, and I'd worry about the mental health of anyone who actually thought they saw one. Oh. Sue's expression fell in disappointment. WenDip placed a comforting hand on his shoulder and whispered into his ear. Remember, big guy, we can't force it. He's gotta remember on his own. Yeah, sorry about that. Guess I just got a little overexcited. Sue stopped whispering and turned his attention back to a confused Dipper and put on his best smile, though it still seemed kind of sad. Sorry about that, dog. This is my own personal design, so I'm just kind of proud of it and stuff. No biggie. Why don't we start that tour now? The exhibits were conversation starters, to say the least. The Sasquatch, the grizzly corn, the Fiji mermaid, a giant's ear. The only thing worse than the complete absurdity of it all was the fact that Dipper could swear he'd seen these ridiculous attractions somewhere before. Only he knew that was impossible, and his struggle to wrap his head around it was giving him another massive headache. Midway through the tour, he finally had to stop and grab at his head, drawing Wendy and Sue's attention to him. You seein' things again, man? Maybe. I'm just. Why do I keep seeing the head of Larry King fighting with a mouse over a piece of cheese? Wendy and Sue both jumped and then looked at each other. Sue sprang into action and ran into the nearby kitchen, grabbing a broom conveniently resting against the wall in the hallway. Dipper and Wendy listened in on the strange banging sounds coming from the kitchen. Bad. Bad wax head of Larry King. What did we tell you about stealing the nice mouse family's cheese? Dipper grabbed at this head again, prompting Wendy to put a supportive hand on his back. Well, he might be a while. Hey, there's something I want to show you. The last place Dipper expected to end up was on the roof of the mystery shack, yet here he was. This spot is what I used to call my break room when I worked here. Wendy laughed as she sat down, stretched, and made herself comfortable. Man, if only I still had my cooler up here. We used to hide up here and just chill whenever we needed to get away from work for a while. You mean you and Mabel? Wendy winced. She didn't even care about her slip-up, but more so the fact that Dipper couldn't remember all the times they hung out up there together. As cool and collected as she was trying to act, keeping up the facade was getting harder and harder the longer the day went on, to a point that she wished she could just shake him by the shoulders until she rattled the memories right back into his head. It was sad to think that in a separate reality, this was the location another version of Dipper proposed to his Wendy. Yeah. Me and Mabel. Dipper, who had remained standing, got distracted by the vision of a younger Wendy jumping off the roof of the shack and sliding down a tree. The image gave him strange feelings he didn't understand and were making him extremely uncomfortable. So much so, that he wanted down from that spot as soon as possible. I'm not so good with heights. I think I'm going to head back down now if you don't mind. Wendy just grumbled in agreement, still lamenting things beyond her control, before following Dipper back down into the shack. Once they were both on the ground level, Wendy asked, So, is there anything in particular you'd like to see next? I wouldn't mind seeing the attic. Wendy froze, a spark of hope in her yes. That was an oddly specific request, and Dipper definitely seemed to have something on his mind. Sure, I can take you up there. Any particular reason you'd want to see the attic, though? That's one thing I do remember Mabel rambling on about at length. Her attic bedroom in the mystery shack. I'd like to see what all the fuss was about. Another lie. He didn't know what it was, but something was drawing him to the attic. He felt like these strange visions he'd been having might make more sense if he listened to the call. Sure, I can take up there. Just follow me and I'll. Would you mind just pointing me in the right direction? I'd kind of like to check out the room on my own if you don't mind. Wendy didn't. This felt like a good sign that something about being inside the mystery shack was resonating with Dipper, so she guided him as far as the stairwell up to the attic, and then went to find Seuss to give him the news and hopefully get some information out of him. Oh, hey Wendy. Where's Dipper? Dude, he went up to the attic by himself. I mean, he straight up asked to go up there, no prompting at all. Cool. Sue stopped to think about the situation for a second. That is a good thing, right? I dunno. Wendy admitted. We want him to remember, and the plan definitely seems to be working, but gettin' his memories back definitely seems to be havin' a weird effect on him. He's not actin' like a guy who's slowly gettin' his memories back and rememberin' who he is. He's actin' disturbed by them, like he's being shown some kind of life he's been convinced he never lived. Maybe it's because his memory isn't all the way unlocked yet, I don't know, but he's not exactly reactin' like we hoped he would. Did you happen to leave the book on the bed upstairs? Sure did. Dipper shouldn't be able to miss it. When I think about what you said though, do you think it'll actually be a good thing for him to find it? It's too late to change our minds now, Seuss. It's now or never, so we have to play every card we have available to us, and that book is our ace of spades. Dipper entered the attic bedroom cautiously. Those strange visions he'd been having continued to roll in, and for some reason, they seemed to be pushing him towards the attic, which caused Dipper to feel a little bit weirded out over venturing inside. There was nothing particularly intimidating about the room at first glance. It was a fairly standard bedroom setup for a younger child. The only problem was nothing about it was right. That's not where the bed went. In fact, there were two beds. One on this side of the room, and one on the other. Mabel had this half of the room, and the other half was mine? But that makes no sense. Why do I keep having flashbacks of myself in places I've never been? Dipper's head began to hurt again, but that's when he noticed it. There was a book resting randomly on the bed. Nothing strange in itself, but it was the state of the book that drew his attention. It was an older, weathered-looking tome with a six-fingered handprint on the cover, the number 3 emblazoned in the middle of it. He knew this book. No, this journal. Unlike the numerous other images and feelings he'd been experiencing at random since his arrival, he didn't question this one in the slightest. He didn't know the why nor the how, but he had a connection with this book. How could he not pick it up and see what mysteries were printed within? Boy, did he have no idea how literal his thoughts would prove to be. Flipping through that book proved to potentially be a massive mistake, as each flip of the page brought on a new memory. Or hallucination or new vision, or whatever the hell these images were. Rather than the slow, steady trickle of glimpses from this alternate life he'd seemingly lived, which were painful and disorientating enough as they were, they hit him like a flood smashing into his brain. From finding that hallowed-out tree in the woods that led to his discovery of the journal, to every adventure spawned and creature encountered that came straight out of that book, to everything involving the talking Illuminati symbol. It all came back to him in the span of a few seconds. It was all too much to process at once, and he never even heard himself scream before he blacked out. When Dipper came to, it felt like only a few seconds had passed. Yet somehow, he found himself no longer in the attic, but laying on a sofa in what appeared to be the shack's living room. A very familiar face was looking down at him. Ugh. Mabel? Finally, you're awake. Wendy and Seuss heard you scream and then found you unconscious in the attic. You've had us all so worried. Us all? Dipper's eyes widened when he noticed a large amount of people were crowded in and around the room. He bounced straight off the couch, standing in a defensive position next to this sister, looking very much like a wounded cat that felt like it was cornered. Where did all these people come from? For our birthday party, Dipper. Calm down, Dipper, we're all friendly, I assure you, son. Stanford assured him as he approached cautiously, his hand extended outward in a gesture he hoped his great-nephew would view as non-threatening. We understand that you don't know any of us. No, that's not the problem. Dipper replied frantically, as he took in all the different faces surrounding him. The problem is that I do know all of you. I recognize every face in this room, and I shouldn't. This is the first time I've ever even visited Gravity Falls, and when I got off that bus a few hours ago, every one of you were complete strangers to me. Now I have all these memories of a life I never lived, and I feel like I'm losing my mind. Can I make a suggestion, Dipper? Wendy asked very cautiously as she approached him. Have you considered that maybe these Images you've been seeing since you got to town might be your real memories, and that the life you've been living in Piedmont might be the illusion? Dipper frowned at her response. Not the reaction Wendy was hoping for, certainly. Great, so I have two options. Either I'm being haunted by images of a life I don't remember living slowly driving me insane, or the life I have known is nothing but one gigantic lie. Gee, I don't know which one to pick, both options seem so appealing. I need to get out of here. He spared his sister a quick glance before storming towards the exit of the mystery shack. Happy birthday, Mabel. Dipper, wait. Mabel started after him, only to get held back by Stan and Pacifica. I'll go after him, Mabes. I'm the one who's supposed to be the key to unlocking his memory. Wendy sighed dejectedly. Bang up job I'm doing, isn't it? Dipper, stop. Wendy called as she chased Dipper outside, only to find that he hadn't gotten far past the door. He turned to face her with an indecipherable expression. Dude. Can you drive me to the bus station? He asked abruptly. Sure. After the party. I'm not going anywhere until it's over. Will you reconsider? I'm sorry, but I need to get out of this town. It's doing strange things to my head. I think you should come back inside and celebrate with your sister. She's the reason you came all this way, isn't she? Dipper frowned and shook his head. Never mind, I'll just walk then. Thanks for the tour, I guess. Dipper, be serious. You can't walk all the way to the bus stop, you don't know your way around the area. I know it better than you might think, Wendy. I know it better than I think I should. Dipper's voice grew softer as he explained. I'm sorry, I'm not trying to take my frustrations out on your or anybody else. It's one of the reasons I need to leave. At best I'll be a total downer, and at worst, potentially volatile. There's so many images swimming around in my head, between the evil one-eyed pyramid monsters to alien spaceships and shapeshifters. The only way I can think to stop it is to get as far away from this town as I possibly can. Wendy had no intention of helping Dipper skip town. She did need to keep him as close to her as she possibly could, so his memories still had a fighting chance to completely return to him. At least if she agreed to drive him, she'd have more power to stall him. Talk to him a bit more. Convince him somehow that his sister really needs him to stay with her through the night. Something, anything to keep him in Gravity Falls until they could break through whatever wall was still preventing Dipper from accepting which reality was truly his. Fine, I drive you if you're that determined to disappoint your sister. Navigating through the wilderness in this area can still be tricky even if you know your way around. Just hang out here for a second while I go get my keys. Dipper's demeanor softened considerably. Thank you. I appreciate it. It took Wendy all of a minute to locate her keys, not saying a word to a soul despite everyone's questing gaze falling upon her as she re-entered the shack. She headed straight out the gift shop door, only for things to be made slightly more complicated. Because Dipper was nowhere to be found. Are you kidding me? I told him I'd give him a ride, why would he take off on me? Wendy would be a little more concerned if not for the fact that she knew Dipper couldn't have gotten far in a little over a minute's time. All she needed to do was head in the direction of the bus stop and she'd catch up to him sooner than later. Unless, of course, his memories of the area weren't as clear as he was claiming earlier. Or if he wasn't headed for the bus station at all. Something about what Dipper had said right before he'd asked to be taken to the station stood out to her. It was a roll of the dice, betting on whether or not he'd actually consider going there, but it was one she felt she needed to take. And it turned out she was right on the money. She found Dipper seated upon a familiar log located somewhere above a familiar bunker. The young man had a very contemplative expression on his face. He noticed Wendy as soon as she walked up to him, somehow both appearing surprised and not surprised at all by her appearance. How did you think to look for me here? You mentioned something earlier about a shapeshifter. This is where that happened, so I figured if that was your last memory that appeared to you, you just might come check it out. The two Wendy's. The two versions of you fighting. I also saw a younger version of me making a very embarrassing confession to a younger you, just to get shot down because he was too young for you. Oh. Sorry about that one man, Wendy said softly as she sat down next to him. I imagine that wasn't the most pleasant moment to remember all of the sudden. Actually, I found it a rather positive memory, if that's indeed what it is. When Wendy gave him a confused look, he smiled softly and elaborated. You broke his heart about as gently as a person could. Much nicer than you had to be about it, and definitely a much more pleasant experience than I've ever had with any other girl who's turned me down or broken up with me. It just goes to show what a good person you are. Wendy blushed faintly, but stayed quiet, wanting to allow him the opportunity to keep talking. This was a good sign. It had to be a good sign. We knew each other, didn't we? In this other life I've apparently lived but doesn't feel real. We were actually pretty close from what I can tell. Doesn't matter, man. What does matter is if you believe that we were close or not. If you still think all these memories coming back to you are illusions or a trick of your mind, that's kind of all that matters. I know we were. These images, memories, flashbacks, or whatever the hell we want to call them. I see you everywhere. Every other memory, there you are. And I can feel how that version of myself felt about you. There's no denying it, even if I wanted to. But that doesn't change the fact that when I got off the bus this morning, you were still basically a complete stranger to me. Wendy winced hard. After all she'd been through. The deal with Cooper, getting sick, Dipper losing his memory to save her, and finding herself forced to wait weeks for an opportunity to get those memories back. All of that combined was nothing compared to the person she loved referring to her as a total stranger. Getting kicked in the chest repeatedly by a horse would have hurt less in comparison. Mississippi. Dipper gasped softly at seeing his guide for the day staring blankly ahead of her, clearly trying and failing not to cry as tears leaked from her eyes and dampened her cheeks. Dipper wasn't sure what he might have said that could have upset her so much. From his perspective, he was as much a stranger to her as she was to him. Clearly, this wasn't the case though. Are you okay? Don't touch me. Wendy violently pulled her shoulder away from his outstretched hand as she jumped off the log. She quickly tried to gather herself. Wendy, don't. Don't take it out on him, he can't help it. As much as it hurts to hear, he really doesn't know me from anyone else in this town. I'm just a girl he sees a lot in memories he hasn't fully accepted are his own yet. If you're still wantin' to catch that bus, I'd better take you now. I still gotta get back to your sister's party while there's still one to attend, with or without you. Dipper was a bit taken aback by how bitter she sounded so suddenly but nodded his head in appreciation anyway. Thank you. It took some mild convincing to get Dipper to agree to head back to the shack first to get her car, but thankfully for him, Wendy had no ulterior motives this time. She seemed to be going through the motions at this point. It didn't take long for them to arrive at the same bus stop Dipper had disembarked his bus from just a few hours before. When she had first chased him out of the shack, Wendy had no intention of allowing Dipper to reach this point without a fight, but at that moment, Wendy was feeling completely defeated. What else could she do? Dipper seemed to be getting his memories back. He even acknowledged he could sense the feelings he once had for her on some level, but that still wasn't enough to break through whatever barrier was preventing Dipper from acknowledging his own past. What was she supposed to do going forward if he chose to view his visions as some surreal movie that just happened to star a version of himself, and not as actual memories and feelings from his own life? It felt like such an impossible hill to climb at this point. Dipper was a bit surprised when Wendy didn't simply drop him off but chose to get out of the car and hang around with him for a bit. They stood there silently for quite a while, Dipper's hands gripping tightly around his backpack, and Wendy's stuffed in the pockets of her jeans. Wendy had calmed down considerably, but was still a bit shell-shocked, yet knew she couldn't just let him go without trying one last time to open his mind. I know you've realized by now that there's something more going on here than you just having weird visions and junk. Is your plan really just to run away from it? I don't think you appreciate what I'm going through right now. A few hours ago, I was visiting some backwater town my sister lived in so we could spend our birthday together. That was it. I wasn't expecting to get bombarded by memories of this apparent life I've lived that feels like some strange fever dream, and my life as I know it might all be a complete lie. It's a lot to unpack. You can't do that here? With your sister to help you? She didn't care if she was going off script. She was desperate. Your family. Your friends. Mabel is the only family I know. And I don't have any friends here. How can you still say that? You've seen how many memories by now that have told you otherwise. Dipper lowered his gaze, unable to meet hers. Damn it, how can you still not remember me? What we meant to each other, after everything we've been through together. Don't you think I want to? I want to understand why I see you in every other vision I have of this place. Why I get the feelings I get from those memories. They don't make sense to me. Until this morning, we'd never even met as far as I knew. She was crying again, Wendy could feel it. She calmed herself down and tried another tactic. It's going to be hours before the next bus runs. You're lucky they added a second route to the schedule a couple of years ago, otherwise you'd be stuck here until tomorrow. I know that. I can wait. You could always go to the party and wait there. With your sister. I can't do that. Every fiber of my being is screaming that I need to get out of his town as fast as I can. Fine. Throw your entire life away if that's what you're determined to do. Just. Wendy gently touched Dipper on the side of his arm. He stared at her in confusion, which only got worse when she yanked his cap clear off his head and replaced it with the trapper's hat she'd been wearing. Still stunned, he watched her place his cap on her head and somehow managed a weak smile through her teary eyes. You're still important to me, man. Damn it, I love you, Dip. I just hope one day you can remember that you used to feel the same way. After wiping her eyes with her sleeve, Wendy raced over to her car and sped away, leaving a shocked Dipper to eat the car's dust. Well. He got what he wanted, he supposed. With few options at hand, Dipper did the only thing he really could, and that was to sit down on the bench and struggle to process what had just happened. A girl who he'd seemingly just met a few hours before, yet he seemed to have a lifetime of memories of, told her she loved him, and he literally drove her away crying due to his unintentional obliviousness. He removed the trapper's hat from his head and examined it in his hands, conveniently flashing back to the first time Wendy had swapped hats with him and said the same phrase to him virtually word for word. Everything before the damn it I love you part, anyhow. He could clearly remember how the exchange made the younger version of himself feel, how much he appreciated the gesture. How could it not be a memory if it makes you remember how you felt at the time? That's what scared him so much about these visions at first, other than the intense headaches they could cause. They felt so vivid and real, lifelike to a point that they were downright intimidating, especially when they make you feel like you're peeking into a life you don't recognize as your own. He tried to think back on his current life, as he recalled it, and see if he could recall similar memories that instilled the same feelings in him. Surprisingly, he couldn't think of any. For as long as he could remember, all he ever did was go to school, come home, the basic grind of everyday life for somebody his age. Nothing spectacular stood out in the least, nothing like his memories from Gravity Falls, many of which bordered on the lines of so fantastical that it was hard for him to believe they actually happened. Was Wendy right? Was the very standard uneventful life that he knew the one that was actually an illusion that he'd somehow been fooled into believing? His eyes grew large as another key memory from that last day of his first alleged summer in Gravity Falls surfaced. The note, Dipper guesses he should call it, that he could clearly remember Wendy handing to him. He recognized that piece of paper immediately. It was tucked away in his backpack after all. He pulled off his bag and frantically rummaged through the pack digging for the letter. He'd brought it along specifically because he wanted to ask Mabel about it. It was a simple letter that said, "See you next summer," with a variety of signatures from whom he assumed were locals of Gravity Falls. He also assumed it was Mabel's since, well, how could he receive a goodbye letter from a place he'd never been from people he'd never met, but then why was it safely tucked away in a drawer in his bedroom? And why was it in an envelope with his name on it? He finally located the letter, and hastily opened up the note. He remembered the first time he stumbled across said note a few days before. He hadn't recognized any of the signatures the first time he'd read that note, but now he recognized most every name on that page, every last one he'd learned from the various visions that had blitzkrieged through his head that day. Most importantly though, he now clearly remembered the moment Wendy had handed him the envelope. That combination provided him something he desperately needed throughout his short but intense internal crisis. Actual physical evidence. Not a vivid but confusing memory that alluded to a past he may have forgotten, but actual evidence he'd been to Gravity Falls before. Ironically, not realizing he'd been wearing actual evidence on his head for most of that day. There was no way he'd have this note in his possession if he hadn't been there that early summer morning to receive it. That's why his memories of this town felt so real. That's why there were so many gaps in his memory from his life back in Piedmont, where nothing substantial happened. Those were the false memories. That would also explain why even his parents were acting weird when he talked about never visiting Gravity Falls. That's it. Dipper shouted as she jumped up off the bench. This letter is proof. I have been to Gravity Falls before. I have friends here. Most of my fondest memories are from this town. It's like a second home to me. And no stupid Bill Cipher One Abe is going to take that away from me. As Dipper experienced his epiphany, somewhere deep within his mind around his hippocampus, something broke. The moment it disappeared, every last memory that still eluded him came rushing back all at once, only this time it didn't hurt. More importantly, whatever was blocking his sense of self also disappeared. A wide smile on his face, Dipper placed the trapper's hat in his backpack along with the letter. I'm back. You hear that? Fuck you, Cooper Scroll, I'm back. Meanwhile, back at his cave viewing these pivotal events unfolding through his, television, Cooper Scroll pouted, holding a carnival-style bag of popcorn. Well, that was rather uncalled for. I can appreciate the dramatic flair and timing though. Now, hopefully old Dippy Boy doesn't ruin what could potentially be a substantially heartfelt, romantic reveal scene by doing something stupid like remembering that cell phones exist. Cooper grabbed a handful of popcorn and shoved it towards himself, the kernels bouncing off his mostly featureless face and falling to the floor. Back with Dipper, the young man did not disappoint. Wendy. Wendy. Thinking emotionally more than logically, Dipper started a dash in the direction of the mystery shack. If he hurried, maybe he could make it therein. Dipper didn't make it very far, because Wendy hadn't made it very far. She'd driven a few hundred feet before pulling off to the side of the road and resting her head against the steering wheel. She just couldn't bring herself to actually leave Dipper behind. She was seriously considering just knocking Dip's ass out and dragging him back to the mystery shack, hogtied if necessary. While she wasn't sure how things could get much worse, that's one tactic that just might get the job done. Wendy jumped as she heard a gentle tapping at her window. She was shocked to see Dipper standing out there, smiling and waving at her. Dipper. Wendy rolled down her window in quick order. What's going on? Well, I got to thinking about what you said and decided. Maybe I should go back to the party after all. I know how Mabel is. She'd probably let it ruin her entire night if I refused to be there. That's great. The power locks don't work on this old junk heap, so let me. Wendy froze in confusion as Dipper reached inside the car and felt her forehead with the back of his hand. She stiffened but didn't complain as Dipper's hand left her forehead and his palm traveled down her cheek, bringing a light blush to it. Dipper finally removed his hand from her face, a relieved smile on his own. No fever or anything, that's good. You had any coughing or aches recently? No, I've been perfectly fine. Why are? The words died in her throat, as her eyes widened. She dare not say what she was thinking as she was fresh out of hope. That's a relief. Since getting my memory back pretty much cancelled out Cooper's end of the deal, I needed to make sure he didn't renege on his end of the. Whoa. Dipper barely avoided the car door as it swung open but failed to avoid getting run over by Wendy as she tackled him to the ground. Apparently that was all she needed to hear. Dipper laughed the entire way down, landing on his rump, and managing to hold Wendy against him as she wrapped him up tight in a ferocious hug that included burying her face into his shoulder. Dipper returned the embrace only briefly before Wendy pulled away, a deadly serious look on her face. "Are you?" "Yes, Wendy. I'm back. And I love you too." Dipper barely got the words out before Wendy's lips were on his. He failed to suppress a laugh, he was feeling too giddy, before returning the kiss and matching her intensity the best he could. Wendy pulled back long enough to take a breath and give Dipper a quick chop on the shoulder. "Damn it, Dipper. If you ever scare me or do anything like this to me ever again, I swear to God I'll..." Wendy's preceding comment had to be redacted in order to maintain the integrity of the T rating. The author apologizes for any inconvenience. Okay, I promise I'll behave. Let's just both agree not to make any more deals with one-eyed demons. Two eyes. We'll cross that bridge if we ever come to it. I swear, you better be worth all the trouble you cause me, Dipper. You know I'm not Wendy. I'll be the one who decides that, Dip. Now shut up and keep kissing me." Dipper obeyed, and the young couple held on to each other for dear life as they made up for weeks of lost time. They had no idea how long they were like that, but the sun was beginning to get low in the sky. As tempting as it was for Wendy to keep Dipper for herself, there was still a whole mess of people at the mystery shack wondering what was going on. "We better head back to the shack and let the others know we unlocked your memories. Poor Mabel's probably still freaking out." Wendy smirked at Dipper impishly. "We can pick up where we're leaving off later." Dipper could only smile in response. Back at the mystery shack, the decent-sized gathering resembled anything but a party. The birthday girl had her head hung low over the table, tapping her fingers against it, desperately waiting for some kind of word from Wendy. Pacifica, who was gently massaging Mabel's back, offered, "I'm sure there's nothing to worry about, Mabel. He's clearly getting his memories back, and if Wendy's been out with him this long, that has to be a good sign, right?" "I hope so." Pause. That look on his face as he ran out of here, though. It was like we were all monsters in some kind of messed up nightmare he'd been having. Pumpkin. I hate to bring this up under the circumstances, but..." Stan looked around the room regretfully. "If you're not up for having your party tonight, maybe we should start letting folks go home." "You're probably right. Not knowing what's going on with Dipper, I just don't..." Mabel was interrupted by the sound of a bell ringing in the distance. The sound of the gift shop door being opened. Mabel looked towards the entrance of the kitchen hopefully, and sure enough, a brightly smiling Wendy waltzed in, literally arm in arm with her brother, who was rubbing the back of his neck and blushing bashfully. "Happy birthday, Mabes. Look what I managed to drag back home." "Oh, and guess what he found along the way?" Mabel stood up, her eyes twinkling hopefully. Dipper approached her, smiling shyly, before opening his arms up to her. Awkward sibling hug? Mabel knew exactly what that meant, and immediately launched herself at her brother, screaming about how he was back. This incited a massive group mugging of the Pines twins as everyone rushed to join the celebratory group hug. Wendy was one of the few people who stayed back, smiling contentedly to herself. She could let the others have their moment with Dipper. For everything she'd been through, she had to remember that they had all lost Dipper for a while too. A woman who looked very similar to Wendy walked up and stood beside her. "You walked in here awfully clingy." "Well, I might just be a little clingy with this one, so you might have to get used to it." "I will." "Glad to hear it actually. I think this one's a keeper. I'm just sorry you two had to go through so much to make it happen." "I'd do it all again, Mom. I felt like I was going through hell at times, but in the end, I got you back, I got my health back, and Dipper found himself again. It's all been worth it as far as I'm concerned. Hopefully things will get a little easier for the two of you from here." Mrs. Corduroy smirked smugly. "Did you remember to pack protection?" "Mom." The party finally got to get underway, only much later than expected. Wendy and Dipper hung off each other the entire night, so the rest of the party guests gave them a wide berth, feeling that they deserved it after all they'd been through. No announcement needed to be made, anyone with eyes and a brain could see what was going on with the two. Eventually, Dipper and Wendy managed to sneak away from the rest of the party guests via Wendy's former break room. They casually held hands as they looked up into the sky. "I'm sorry, man. In all the chaos, and trying to plan a way to help get your memories unlocked, I forget to get you a birthday present." "You already did," Dipper laughed as he pointed at his head. "Thank you for that, by the way. Without you, I'm not sure I ever would have remembered who I was. I still should have gotten you something more tangible." Wendy smiled mischievously as the perfect solution dawned on her. Oh hell, she'd been planning it for hours. "Actually, I did have a little something in mind." "Oh yeah? What might that be?" "Well, we have two options. Either I can give it to you here and we risk everybody in the shack listening in, or we sneak away and go to my place and be as loud as we want to be." "Huh?" It took Dipper's bashful mind a second longer to catch up with what Wendy was hinting at, and his brain malfunctioned immediately. "Oh. You mean. You're adorable," Wendy grinned as she gave him a quick kiss on the lips. "Now, let's get out of here before anybody notices. We've got a lot of lost time to make up for. And oh, what a wonderful night it was." The end. Bonus scene. Before we wrap things up, I have a little bonus scene for you guys. Now, some of you might remember that in Chapter 3, Cooper mentions that only our story's version of Wendy would be able to see the memory orb fragments, yet a couple of chapters later, another character clearly notices one of the orbs. I tried to clear this up at the beginning of this chapter since I realized it might be difficult to notice if you're not paying super close attention to every little detail. This was an intentional inclusion, and not an oversight on my part. Which can only mean one thing, right? For anyone who noticed, congratulations. For everybody else, you can still enjoy this extra helping of WenDip goodness. Wendy watched with complete fascination until the glowing orb in Dipper's hand disappeared. Her husband then gasped with a start, as if he'd just woken up from a nightmare. Wendy walked over to him and put a comforting, but knowing hand on his shoulder. "You okay, hun?" "Yeah, I think so. How did I wind up in my office though? The last thing I remember is walking into the bathroom and I think I might have blacked out." He looked to his wife who was wearing a strange smile on her face. He then noticed what she was wearing and nearly forgot anything else going on with him. "Oh wow. Were we about to?" "Yup, in about a minute or two," Wendy giggled, as she put her hand up to her husband's face. "I think I know what happened, Dip. Do you remember me telling you how I had to dimension hop to get your memories back after that Cooper scroll removed them from everybody?" "Yeah, you said you had to inhabit the bodies of several people you know, including me." Dipper's eyes widened in realization. "What a minute are you saying?" "Yup. Looks like I've snatched your body for a while. Now that I think about it, what just happened to her is pretty much exactly the same thing that happened to me all those years ago." Wendy couldn't help but giggle. Poor girl. I guess that wasn't an alternate reality after all. And here I thought we were just getting lucky when I saw our lives slowly unfolding, exactly the way they did when I saw them then. So, I had you hijacking my body for a while, huh? Well, as long as it was you, I guess I'm okay with the violation of my personal space. Well, I'm not so sure I'm okay with it. Even if it was myself, I'm not sure I'm too wild about another girl being all up in my husband's body," Wendy said playfully as she took Dipper by the hand. "Now come on. It's time for me to reclaim what's rightfully mine." "Yes, ma'am." Dipper saluted, causing Wendy to snort in amusement, which somehow led to Dipper chasing the love of his life upstairs.